Have you ever witnessed an impossible act of loyalty between two completely different creatures? In the blistering heat of the Arizona desert, a black stray cat named Shadow was curled protectively around a tiny bobcat kitten named Rusty. And what he was doing went far beyond simple affection. Shadow's posture was tense and vigilant, his green eyes darting at every movement. Yet he refused to leave the fragile bundle of fur he had somehow claimed as his own. This was not a casual encounter in the wild. It was a desperate, instinctive mission to keep another life from slipping away. Evelyn Parker, a 72-year-old widow who'd spent decades in quiet study of the desert, noticed the unusual sight from her small stucco home. She had seen strays and wildlife before, but nothing like this.
The kitten's cries were faint, a rasping sound that barely carried on the dry wind, and Shadow was relentless in his ministrations, licking and nudging Rusty while standing guard against anything that approached. Evelyn, always calm and precise, felt a sudden surge of urgency. She could see that Rusty was weak and dehydrated, and that Shadow's fierce devotion might be the only thing keeping him alive. As the morning sun climbed higher and the shadows lengthened across the prickly pear, Evelyn knew she could not simply watch. Something had to be done, and the delicate balance between trust and danger was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined.
Have you ever wondered what lengths a creature will go to protect a life that is not its own? Shadow, the sleek black stray cat, refused to leave Rusty's side, even as the heat of the Arizona morning pressed down on them both. Evelyn Parker watched from a distance, her heart caught between awe and worry. She could see that Rusty's tiny body trembled with weakness, and Shadow's green eyes flicked constantly toward the surrounding desert, ready to defend against any perceived threat. She knew that approaching too quickly might drive Shadow away, yet the kitten's fragile state demanded immediate attention.
Slowly, Evelyn stepped toward the pair, her hand steady and her voice a low murmur of reassurance, calling out soft words that she hoped would be understood by the wild creatures before her. Shadow's body stiffened instantly, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest, a warning and a plea all at once. Evelyn froze, unwilling to break the delicate tension, but she noticed how the black cat would shift slightly, nudging Rusty with his head, as if acknowledging her presence but refusing to relinquish his charge. Time stretched as she calculated her next move, knowing that the kitten could not survive much longer without care. With careful precision, she retreated briefly and retrieved a can of tuna she kept for emergencies, placing it a short distance from Rusty, hoping the smell would entice Shadow to take a moment for his own survival. The effect was immediate. Shadow's attention wavered, his body tensing with the internal battle between hunger and devotion. Inch by inch, he approached the food, but his gaze never left Rusty, a silent promise that the small life in his care would not be abandoned. Evelyn took this moment to prepare a thick garden towel and a mesh carrier, knowing that when the opportunity came, she would have to act decisively. Shadow's every movement was measured, his loyalty absolute, yet Evelyn could sense the strain of the day on the fragile pair. The sun climbed higher, and Rusty's rasping cries became fainter, each one pulling at her heart with the urgency of the moment.
When Shadow finally took a hesitant bite from the tuna, Evelyn seized the chance, moving slowly toward the kitten, scooping him into the towel with gentle hands, her pulse quickening with fear and determination. Shadow's reaction was instantaneous, a streak of black fury as he lunged toward her legs, claws extended, driven not by anger, but by desperate love and protective instinct. Evelyn stumbled slightly but held fast, murmuring apologies as she closed the carrier door around Rusty, feeling the kitten's tiny frame tremble within her grasp. Shadow followed relentlessly. Running alongside her car, she started the engine, yowling and swiping at the tires as if trying to will Rusty to safety.
Evelyn's mind raced as she called Jason Reed from Animal Control, explaining the situation with urgency and breathless detail, and within minutes, she was following his directions to meet at a safer, closer location. Shadow stayed with her for 2 blocks, keeping pace as though tethered by the invisible bond that had formed between him and Rusty, until finally, with a glance back, he slowed, watching until the last glimpse of Rusty disappeared into the carrier. Evelyn felt the weight of the day pressing on her, a mixture of relief and heartbreak, knowing that although the first step toward saving Rusty had been taken, the road ahead was uncertain, and Shadow's vigil was far from over. She whispered reassurances into the warm morning air, hoping that the bond of love and protection she had witnessed would carry the 2 fragile lives through the trials that were yet to come, each step a careful dance between courage and compassion in the unforgiving desert sun.
What would you do if a life depended entirely on your understanding of instinct and timing? Shadow had followed every step of Rusty's journey to the clinic, his sleek black form a shadow of worry that never left the tiny bobcat's side. Evelyn Parker's hands were clammy as she carried the fragile carrier into the sterile fluorescent lights of Dr. Melissa Grant's office, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and urgency. The moment Rusty was placed on the examination table, Shadow's green eyes widened with panic, his low hiss a warning, a plea, and a cry of despair all at once.
Dr. Grant knelt slowly, her hands steady but her voice soft, murmuring reassurances to the frantic cat, trying to bridge the divide between wild instinct and human intervention. As the tests began, Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She watched Rusty's tiny body, almost weightless in the towel, shivering slightly, his breathing shallow, while Shadow attempted to climb onto the table, desperate to provide warmth and comfort. The results of the blood work brought a chilling silence. Rusty had ingested a potent rodenticide, a poison that attacked his blood, leaving him weak, bleeding internally, and unable to regulate his own temperature. Evelyn's heart sank, and Dr. Grant's hands trembled slightly as she explained the severity of the situation. The kitten's survival would depend on immediate intervention, warmth, and a careful regimen of medication and fluids. Shadow, sensing the danger, pressed closer to the carrier, his body a trembling wall of protection, refusing to leave even as the veterinary team worked around him.
Evelyn knew she had to follow the instructions, yet the scene was surreal. A domestic stray cat acting as a guardian to a wild predator, an instinctive act of life-saving that no human could have orchestrated. Night fell outside the clinic, the desert air cooling as the staff worked to stabilize Rusty, and Shadow remained a vigilant sentinel, his body curled tightly against the carrier, green eyes glowing in the dim light, a living shield against cold and fear. Evelyn sat quietly on a chair nearby, speaking softly to Shadow and Rusty, her voice a gentle thread connecting them, trying to calm the anxiety that pulsed through the room. She thought about the desert mornings, the quiet solitude of her life before this improbable mission, and realized that she had been drawn into something extraordinary, a story of loyalty and instinct that transcended species. As hours passed, Rusty began to show small signs of improvement, lapping fluids from a syringe, his tiny body stabilizing slightly under the watchful eyes of both Shadow and the veterinary team. Evelyn marveled at the connection, at the way Shadow's warmth and devotion were not merely comforting, but essential to Rusty's fragile survival. Every hiss, every shift of body weight, every nudge was a calculation born of desperation and love. By midnight, Dr. Grant allowed Evelyn a brief moment to cradle Shadow, who reluctantly moved only enough to acknowledge her gentle touch before returning to his post beside Rusty. The night was long, tense, and filled with silent prayers. Yet amidst the uncertainty, a fragile hope persisted. The bond between the black stray and the bobcat kitten was no longer a curious anomaly, but a force that might just tip the scales in favor of life, proving that sometimes instinct and loyalty can create miracles in the quietest, most unexpected ways.
How do you measure the depth of loyalty and the weight of grief in a creature who cannot speak? In the days that followed Rusty's critical treatment, Evelyn Parker witnessed a quiet, aching vigil that seemed to stretch endlessly. Shadow, the black stray, had settled into a small shadowed corner of her living room, refusing food, ignoring the gentle coaxing of Evelyn's voice, and simply waiting. Each day, Evelyn would sit near him, reading softly from novels she had cherished for decades, hoping that the sound of her voice would provide comfort and perhaps remind him that Rusty was still alive, just beyond their reach. Shadow's emerald eyes followed every subtle movement, flicking toward the carrier at the edge of her vision. His body curled tightly, trembling occasionally with worry or exhaustion.
Meanwhile, Rusty, under the careful supervision of Dr. Melissa Grant at her clinic, began to show signs of physical recovery. He was eating, his strength slowly returning, but his spirit remained fragile, a shadow of the vibrant kitten he should have been. Evelyn felt the weight of helplessness, realizing that while medical intervention could mend bones and flush toxins, the emotional bond between the two animals was a force that medicine alone could not reach. The separation was excruciating, and Shadow's quiet suffering was a constant reminder that the bond they shared was profound, an instinctive connection forged in desperation and need.
Evelyn contacted Laura Jennings at the nearby wildlife sanctuary, explaining the extraordinary situation with a mixture of urgency and hope, detailing how Shadow had refused to abandon Rusty, how his body heat had kept the bobcat alive, and how his steadfast devotion was now turning into visible despair. Laura listened patiently and agreed to accept both animals, provided that Shadow could pass a health screening, be neutered, and show he was stable enough to travel. The day of the transfer arrived, and Evelyn carefully placed Shadow into a carrier, his body stiff with reluctance, his eyes wide and unblinking. She could feel the tension, the almost tangible weight of loss and hope intertwined. At the sanctuary, Rusty, now slightly larger and recovering from the rodenticide poisoning, was brought into the quarantine area in his own secure carrier.
When the doors opened, the two animals hesitated for a heartbeat, instinct and recognition clashing in a silent, electric moment. Then, Shadow crept forward, low to the ground, his tail flicking nervously, sniffing the strange new dirt and unfamiliar scents, yet always with Rusty in his line of sight. Rusty responded almost instantly, his small, spotted body moving forward with a tentative but urgent cry. The bond undeniable. They met in the center, bodies pressed together, Shadow curling around Rusty protectively, as if no time or distance had ever separated them. Evelyn and the staff watched in awe, tears silently streaming down their faces, understanding that what they were witnessing went beyond rescue or rehabilitation. It was a reunion born from instinct, love, and the relentless refusal to abandon a friend in need.
Over the next several days, Evelyn stayed nearby, watching as Shadow and Rusty adjusted to their new environment. Rusty regained confidence, learning to climb and pounce under the careful supervision of the sanctuary team, while Shadow remained a constant presence, sometimes guiding, sometimes comforting,
but always vigilant. It became clear that although Rusty would never be fully released into the wild due to the early trauma and imprinting on Shadow, he had gained something far more enduring: a protector, a companion, and a friend who had risked everything to ensure his survival. Evelyn reflected quietly on the lessons of patience, devotion, and the extraordinary capacity for care across species. In the desert and beyond, life could be harsh and unforgiving, yet it was in these fragile moments of connection that hope endured, resilient and unshakable. Shadow had not only saved Rusty physically, but also nurtured his spirit, and in doing so, had transformed both their lives in ways that would leave a lasting imprint on anyone fortunate enough to witness it.
Can a bond forged in desperation and survival truly last a lifetime? At the sanctuary outside Scottsdale, Evelyn Parker watched Shadow and Rusty with a quiet, profound awe. The black domestic cat, once skeletal and wary, now sleek and strong, lounged beside the young bobcat, Rusty, whose spotted coat gleamed in the sunlight, both sharing warmth and trust in a way that transcended species. Visitors often paused, captivated by the unlikely pair, seeing Shadow gently headbutt Rusty or nudge his chin, and Rusty responding with soft purrs or tentative grooming, a mirrored dance of companionship that spoke louder than any words could.
Evelyn spent her weekends driving out to the sanctuary, bringing supplies, reading aloud to Shadow and Rusty, and observing how they interacted in their large, natural enclosure. Rusty had regained strength and confidence, learning to pounce, climb, and explore. But his deepest security and comfort always came from Shadow, the steadfast guardian who had once risked starvation and exhaustion to keep him alive. Over time, it became clear that though Rusty could never return fully to the wild, he had found something equally precious: a companion, a mentor, and a friend who had stood by him in his most vulnerable hours. Shadow, for his part, seemed to understand the depth of the bond, moving through the enclosure with ease, always alert to Rusty's needs, often curling around him as they rested in the sun. Evelyn realized that she had witnessed not just a rescue, but a rare, extraordinary story of love, loyalty, and interspecies devotion. The desert morning that had begun with fragility and fear had transformed into a lifelong partnership, a reminder that sometimes the most profound connections are born from acts of courage and compassion, and that even in a harsh world, hope and friendship can thrive against all odds.